This ring isn't real, the maid's daughter whispered in perfect German, saving the billionaire from a huge scam. The party was meant to be flawless. White orchids, silver trays, and a diamond ring that glittered like a captured star. "Isn't it magnificent in the morning light?" she asked, her laughter echoing in the marble hall. He smiled, but deep down, something in him stirred. From the corner, a child's voice whispered, in flawless German, "This ring isn't real." The air froze. No one reacted, except Arthur Pendleton. And yet, in that single breath, everything began to unravel. How could a 10-year-old see what a billionaire could not? How could a whisper threaten to collapse a life built on power, wealth, and trust? What started as a celebration of love ended as the unmasking of a perfect lie. This is the story of how a billionaire nearly lost everything, and how an unexpected voice saved him from the most dangerous illusion of all. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. What if a child's quiet whisper could shatter a perfectly crafted lie? This is a story about a man who had everything but could see nothing, and a little girl who had nothing but could see everything. It is a story of truth, found in the most unexpected of places. The morning sun of Friday, October 3rd, spilled into the grand foyer of the Pendleton estate, but it brought no warmth. For Arthur Pendleton, the light only served to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny ghost in a house that had been silent for too long. At 65, he was a man carved from success and sorrow. His name was etched onto university libraries and the frosted glass doors of skyscrapers in downtown Chicago. His fortune was vast, a fortress built over a lifetime of shrewd decisions. But inside that fortress, Arthur was just a man, haunted by the memory of a laugh that no longer echoed in the long, marble hallways. His wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 5 years. Cancer had stolen her slowly, piece by piece, leaving him with a silence that was louder than any storm. Since her passing, he had walked through his days like a stranger in his own life. The boardrooms felt hollow. The accolades were meaningless. He had everything a man could want, yet he had nothing that mattered. Until Isabella. Isabella Rossi had walked into his life 6 months ago at a charity gala. She was a vision of life and color in his monochrome world. She was vibrant, with dark, flashing eyes and a laugh that, while not Eleanor's, was a sound of joy in a house that had forgotten it. She was an art consultant, she'd said, with a knowledge of the masters that rivaled his own. She listened to his stories. She held his hand. She made him feel, for the first time in 5 years, like the silence might finally end. Tonight, they would announce their engagement. The house was buzzing with the frantic energy of preparation. Florists arranged cascades of white orchids. Caterers polished silver until it gleamed. The air, usually still and heavy with memory, now smelled of lemon polish and rising bread. Arthur stood by the grand staircase, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He looked at his reflection in the gilded mirror. He saw a tired man in an expensive suit. He saw the deep lines around his eyes. He felt a familiar pang, a small, cold stone of doubt in the pit of his stomach. Was this right? Was it too soon? He pushed the thought away. It was fear, he told himself. Just the fear of letting go of one life to start another. Isabella made him happy. That had to be enough. His maid, Helen, passed by, her movements quiet and efficient. She had worked for him for over a decade, a steady, unobtrusive presence. She had been there through Eleanor's illness, a silent pillar of support. With her was her daughter, Clara. Clara was 10 years old, a wisp of a girl with hair the color of pale straw and eyes the blue of a winter sky. She was as quiet as her mother, but in a different way. Where Helen was reserved, Clara was watchful. She was a ghost of a different sort, often curled up in a window seat with a book, so still that one could easily forget she was there. She was a bright child. Arthur knew she did well in school, but there was a seriousness to her, an old soul quality that was both fascinating and a little unsettling. Isabella came down the staircase then, a whirlwind of perfume and silk. "Arthur, darling," she cooed, her voice like warm honey. She kissed his cheek, leaving a faint trace of red lipstick. "Everything is coming together perfectly. The champagne just arrived." She held out her left hand, letting the light catch the stone on her finger. Isn't it magnificent in the morning light? The ring was a masterpiece, a diamond of impossible size and clarity. It sat on her finger like a captured star. It had cost him a fortune, a stone said to have once belonged to European royalty. It was a symbol, he'd told himself, of a new beginning. "It is beautiful, my dear," Arthur said, forcing a smile. Helen had paused her work nearby, polishing a silver tray. Clara stood beside her, holding a dust cloth. The little girl's gaze was fixed on the ring. Her expression was unreadable. Isabella noticed the girl's stare. She gave a little laugh, a sound that was perhaps a touch too sharp. "It's quite something, isn't it?" she said to Clara, wiggling her fingers as if displaying a toy. "One day, a handsome prince will give you one just like it." Clara didn't smile. Her blue eyes remained locked on the stone. She leaned closer to her mother, her small frame almost hidden by Helen's uniform. She whispered, her voice so soft it was barely a breath, but the words were clear, precise, and utterly shocking. "This ring isn't real." The sentence was perfect, unaccented German. Arthur froze. His blood ran cold. He and Eleanor had spoken German to each other often. It was their private language, a remnant of her childhood in Berlin. He understood the words as easily as he understood English. The whisper hung in the air for a moment, a profound and terrible sound in the bustling hall. Isabella, who spoke only English and a little Italian, hadn't understood. She simply saw a shy child and smiled indulgently. Helen gently nudged her daughter, a silent command to be quiet, her face betraying nothing. But Arthur had heard, and the small, cold stone of doubt in his stomach had just become a mountain. He looked from the brilliant, sparkling stone on Isabella's hand to the serious, unwavering eyes of the 10-year-old girl who had just spoken a truth he could not comprehend. The day had just begun, but already, the world was tilting on its axis. For the next hour, Arthur moved through his house in a daze. He approved flower arrangements. He confirmed the evening's musical selection with the string quartet. He smiled and nodded and spoke, but his mind was elsewhere. It was snagged on those 5 German words. It was absurd. Utterly, completely absurd. What would a 10-year-old girl know about diamonds? Especially a diamond like that one, certified and sourced by the most reputable dealer in the country. It was a child's fantasy, a slip of the tongue. Maybe she didn't even know what she was saying. He found Isabella in the ballroom, directing the placement of tables. She was radiant, her face flushed with excitement. She saw him, and her smile widened. "There you are? I was just deciding that we should put the guest of honor's table by the French doors. The view of the gardens will be lovely this evening." "Lovely," Arthur echoed, his voice distant. He looked at the ring on her hand as she pointed. It caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, scattering tiny rainbows across the polished floor. It looked real. It felt real when he'd held it. The weight, the coldness of the stone. Everything about it screamed authenticity. "Are you all right, darling?" Isabella asked, her brow furrowing with concern. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You seem distracted." "Just a lot on my mind," he said, pulling away gently. "The arrangements. I want everything to be perfect for you." Her expression softened. "It already is perfect," she murmured. "Because I have you." Her words were flawless. Her touch was reassuring. But for the first time, Arthur felt a flicker of something else beneath the surface. A sense of performance. It was like watching a brilliant actress in a play, delivering her lines with perfect emotion. The thought was disloyal, and he hated himself for it. This was the woman who had pulled him from the depths of his grief. He owed her his trust. He owed her his heart. And yet, the whisper. He excused himself, saying he needed to make a phone call from his study. The study was his sanctuary, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and smelling of old paper and leather. It was Eleanor's favorite room. Her portrait hung over the fireplace, her smile kind, her eyes knowing. He often felt her presence here, a comforting warmth. Today, the room felt cold. He looked at her portrait, at the simple gold band on her finger. A ring that was real in a way that had nothing to do with carats or clarity. He needed to understand. He buzzed the staff intercom. "Helen, could you please come to the study?" A few moments later, she appeared at the door, her hands clasped in front of her. "Yes, Mr. Pendleton? Please, come in." "Close the door." Helen did as she was told, her expression calm but questioning. "Helen, I need to ask you about Clara," he began, trying to sound casual. Her German is very good. Does she take lessons? A flicker of something, worry, perhaps, crossed Helen's face before it was smoothed away. No, sir. No lessons. Then where did she learn it? Arthur pressed, his gaze steady. Helen hesitated. She looked down at her hands. From my father, sir. Her grandfather. He was German. This was new information. In all her years of service, Helen had rarely spoken of her family. Your father? Yes. He passed away 2 years ago. He and Clara were very close. He spoke to her in German from the time she was a baby. It was their special language. This explained the fluency, but it didn't explain the content of the words. He taught her more than just the language, didn't he? Arthur said, his voice low. Helen looked up, her eyes meeting his. He could see the conflict in them. Loyalty to her employer and a fierce, protective love for her daughter. My father was a very particular man, sir. He believed in seeing things for what they are. He taught Clara to be observant. Observant enough to judge the quality of a diamond. The question was sharp, and Arthur instantly regretted his tone. Helen's back straightened. My father's name was Michael Vance, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Sergeant Michael Vance. During the Second World War, he was with the Allied forces. He was one of the men assigned to the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program. Arthur stared at her. The Monuments men. He knew the history, of course. The special unit tasked with rescuing priceless art and cultural treasures stolen by the Nazis. They were heroes, scholars in uniform. He spent years recovering stolen art, Helen continued, her voice gaining strength. Part of his job was identifying forgeries. The Nazis were masters of deception. They faked paintings, sculptures, jewelry. My father became an expert. He could spot a fake from 20 paces. He said you don't look at the object, you look at the story it tells. The tiny mistakes. The lack of soul. She paused, taking a breath. He loved Clara more than anything. He didn't have much to leave her, no money or property. But he left her what he knew. He taught her everything. How to see. How to look past the surface and find the truth. It was a game to them. He would show her pictures of paintings, of jewelry, and ask her in German, "What is real, my treasure?" The study was silent. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. This was not a child's fantasy. This was a legacy, a skill passed down from a war hero to his grandchild. A man whose life's work was distinguishing the real from the fake. He looked back at the portrait of his wife. Eleanor's eyes seemed to hold a deep sadness. He had been so lost in his own loneliness, so desperate to fill the void she had left. Had he been blind? Had he chosen to see only what he wanted to see? Thank you, Helen, he said, his voice hoarse. That's all. She nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind her. Arthur was alone again, but the room felt different. It was no longer just his grief that filled the space. It was a terrible, growing certainty. The little girl with the straw-colored hair had not been whispering a fantasy. She had been stating a fact. The seed of doubt, once planted, grew with astonishing speed. Arthur's mind, trained for decades to analyze business deals and spot weaknesses in contracts, was now turned inward, examining the past 6 months with a brutal, unforgiving clarity. He thought about his first few meetings with Isabella. She had been introduced to him by a mutual acquaintance who, now that he thought about it, he barely knew. She had been incredibly knowledgeable about his very specific, very niche collection of 18th-century maritime art. She had praised his taste, his eye for detail. Had her knowledge been genuine, or had it been meticulously researched? He remembered a conversation about her family. She'd spoken of a tragic past. Parents lost young, a modest inheritance spent on a good education. It was a sad story, one that had made him feel protective of her. But it was also a story with no verifiable details. No names, no places. Just a vague, romantic tragedy. Then there were the finances. She had never asked him for money directly. She was too clever for that. But there had been suggestions. An investment opportunity in a new gallery that sounded promising. A rare painting she knew was coming up for a private sale. He had made the investment, bought the painting. He had wanted to please her, to provide for her. He had transferred a significant sum of money to an account she controlled. He had done it out of love, he'd told himself. But looking back, it felt less like a gift and more like a transaction. The ring was the centerpiece of it all, the ultimate symbol. He had wanted the best for her. He'd contacted his family's longtime jeweler, a man named Samuel Finch whose father had made his own wedding band for Eleanor. But Isabella had insisted on using her own specialist. A man from Europe, she'd said. Someone who understood the unique history of these rare estate pieces. Samuel is wonderful for modern things, darling, she had said with a dismissive wave of her hand. But for a stone with this kind of history, you need a true expert. Arthur, eager to impress, had agreed. He had wired the money to an overseas account. The ring had been delivered by a bonded courier a week later, complete with a sheaf of impressive-looking certificates and appraisals. He had never questioned it. Why would he? He was in love. His intercom buzzed, startling him. It was the head of his household staff. Mr. Pendleton, forgive me for disturbing you. Mr. Finch is on the line. He says it's his annual call to review the insurance policies on your late wife's jewelry collection. Shall I put him through? It was a sign. It had to be. Samuel always called around this time of year. A routine call that today felt like a lifeline. Yes, put him through, Robert. Thank you. A moment later, a familiar, steady voice came through the speaker. Arthur? Sam Finch here. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Sam. No, not at all. It's good to hear your voice, Arthur said, the words coming out with more relief than he intended. Just doing my yearly due diligence, Sam said. Reviewing the policy on Eleanor's pieces. Everything is in order, of course. I did hear some news, though. A little bird told me congratulations are in order. Arthur's hand tightened on his desk. Yes, I'm getting married again, Sam. Well, that's wonderful news. I'm happy for you. She must be a very special woman. I trust her ring is properly insured. This was it. The moment of truth. Arthur took a deep breath. That's actually something I was hoping you could help me with, Sam. It's a bit of a last-minute situation. He tried to keep his voice level, professional. My fiancé and I are hosting a party tonight to announce the engagement. I'd feel much better if the ring was appraised for our own policy before the event. For peace of mind. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. Tonight? Arthur, that's short notice. My schedule is packed. I know. And I apologize, Arthur said, his desperation rising. But it would be a great favor to me. Name your price, Sam. I'll have a car waiting for you. It's a significant piece. It needs the best eye. It needs your eye. Sam was quiet for a long moment. He was old school. He valued trust and relationships over rushed jobs. Arthur had known him for 40 years. He had appraised every piece of jewelry Arthur had ever bought for Eleanor. All right, Arthur, Sam said finally, and Arthur felt a wave of relief so intense it made him dizzy. For you. I'll move some things around. I can be there around 4 o'clock. Will that work? 4 o'clock is perfect, Arthur said. Thank you, Sam. Truly. He hung up the phone, his heart pounding. The clock on his mantelpiece read 11:30. He had 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours until he knew for certain if he was the biggest fool in Chicago. He had to find Clara. He found her not in a window seat, but in the one place he should have thought to look first, his library. It was a vast, 2-story room, a cathedral of books. She was perched on the rolling ladder, halfway up a towering shelf, a heavy-looking volume resting in her lap. She was so engrossed she didn't hear him enter. He walked quietly until he stood at the base of the ladder. He looked up at her. This small child, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of centuries. She seemed perfectly at home. Clara, he said softly. She looked down, her blue eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected him. A flash of fear crossed her face, as if she thought she was in trouble for being in here. It's all right, Arthur said gently. You're not in trouble. May I ask what you're reading? She held up the book so he could see the title embossed on the spine, An Introduction to Gemology. It was an old, academic text from his own university days. It's very interesting, she said, her voice small. It talks about inclusions and the refractive index. My Opa, my grandfather, he said that's how you tell their stories. The flaws are the most important part. They tell you where the stone has been. Arthur's throat felt tight. He gestured to the empty chair beside the fireplace. Will you come down and talk with me for a moment? She nodded, carefully marking her page before closing the heavy book. She placed it back on the shelf with a reverence that touched him. She climbed down the ladder with a practiced ease and came to sit in the large leather armchair opposite him. Her feet didn't even touch the floor. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. He looked directly into her clear, serious eyes. Clara, earlier this morning, in the foyer, I heard what you said to your mother. In German. She flinched, her gaze dropping to her lap. She thought he was angry. "I'm not angry," he said quickly. "I just need to understand. How did you know?" She was silent for a long time, her small hands twisting in her lap. He waited patiently. He knew this was important. He knew he had to let her speak in her own time. Finally, she looked up, her expression grave. "Opa taught me," she whispered. He had pictures in a big book. Pictures of the real crown jewels and the fakes the Nazis made. He said you have to look at the light. The real ones, they drink the light. They have a fire deep inside. The fake ones just bounce it back. They're like glass. They're loud, but the inside is quiet. She took a shaky breath. When she, the lady, held her hand out, the light from the window hit the stone. It bounced. It was too perfect, too bright. It was shouting. "Opa always said, 'Real beauty whispers, my treasure.'" Arthur sat back, stunned by the simple, profound poetry of her explanation. Real beauty whispers. He thought of Eleanor's simple ring. It had whispered. Isabella's ring shouted from across the room. "There's more," Clara said, her confidence growing now that he was listening, truly listening. "The edges. On a real diamond that old, the cut wouldn't be so sharp. The edges of the facets would be softer. Time wears everything down, even the hardest things. Her stone has edges like a new knife. It hasn't lived. It was just born." He stared at her, this child who spoke of the erosion of time on gemstone facets, who understood the difference between a stone that drinks light and one that merely reflects it. Helen was right. Her father hadn't just taught her a party trick. He had given her a way of seeing the world, a way of seeing the truth. In that moment, Arthur knew. He didn't need to wait for Sam Finch. He already had his answer. The 10-year-old daughter of his maid had seen what he, with all his wealth, experience, and power, had refused to see. He was engaged to a fraud, and his entire world was a lie. The hours leading up to Sam Finch's arrival were the longest of Arthur Pendleton's life. He moved through his day on autopilot, the opulent rooms of his mansion feeling like a stage set for a play in which he was the unwilling star. Every interaction was fraught with a new, terrible awareness. He saw Isabella supervising the final touches on the floral centerpieces. She was laughing with the florist, a bright, musical sound that now grated on his ears. He watched her correct the angle of a single rose, her movements precise and proprietary. She was not just a guest in this house. She saw herself as its future mistress. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. How could he have been so blind? He saw it now. The subtle way she directed the staff, the casualness with which she used his private accounts for party expenses, the way her eyes would scan a room, not with appreciation, but with assessment. She was not building a life with him. She was acquiring assets. He had lunch with her on the terrace, a light meal prepared by his chef. The food was tasteless in his mouth. "You're so quiet today, Arthur," she said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. She reached across the small table and placed her hand over his. The ring was there, a cold, heavy weight between their skin. "Are you having second thoughts?" A little pre-wedding jitter. She smiled, a playful, knowing expression on her face. It was a look that had once charmed him. Now, it looked like the calculating smile of a predator. "No, of course not," he lied, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "Just want everything to be perfect." "It will be," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "By tonight, everyone will know. Mrs. Isabella Pendleton. It has a lovely ring to it, don't you think?" He simply nodded, unable to speak. The name felt like a violation, a desecration of Eleanor's memory. After lunch, he retreated once more to his study, the only room that felt safe. He found himself searching his own memory for red flags he had missed, for warning signs he had willfully ignored. He remembered her story about attending a prestigious boarding school in Switzerland. He had never thought to question it. He remembered her mentioning a portfolio of art she had helped a wealthy client acquire. He had never asked for the client's name. He had taken everything at face value because he had been starving for affection, for a connection to another human being. He had been a man dying of thirst in a desert, and she had offered him a glass of water. He hadn't stopped to ask if it was poisoned. He felt a deep, profound shame. It was worse than the anger. He was Arthur Pendleton. He had built an empire from nothing. He was a man who could read a balance sheet like a poem and spot a fatal flaw in a business plan from a mile away. But he had been duped, not in the boardroom, but in his own home, in his own heart. His grief had made him vulnerable, and she had exploited that vulnerability with surgical precision. At precisely 4 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Robert, the head butler, announced through the intercom, "Mr. Finch is here, sir." "Send him to the study, Robert," Arthur replied, his voice steady despite the frantic beating of his heart. He needed to get the ring from Isabella without raising her suspicions. This would be the most difficult performance of his life. He found her in the master suite, looking over the dress she planned to wear that evening. It was a stunning creation of deep crimson silk. "Isabella, my dear," he said, forcing a warmth he did not feel into his tone. She turned, her face lighting up. "Arthur, what do you think? Will I be the talk of the town?" "You always are," he said smoothly. He walked over to her and took her hand. "I had an idea. Something a bit sentimental." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "My jeweler, Sam Finch, is here. He's an old family friend. He's reviewing the insurance on some of Eleanor's pieces. I thought it might be a beautiful gesture if he added your ring to the Pendleton family policy, officially making it a part of the collection before our announcement tonight. A new heirloom to begin our new life." He watched her face carefully. For a fraction of a second, he saw it. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a radiant smile. But he had seen it. "Oh, Arthur, how thoughtful," she said, her voice a little too bright. "But is that really necessary right now? The man is here for your late wife's things. It feels awkward, and we have guests arriving in just a few hours. Can it wait?" Her resistance was the final nail in the coffin of his doubt. "It will only take a moment," Arthur insisted gently, but with a firmness that surprised them both. "It's important to me, Isabella. A formality, but a meaningful one. Please." She could not refuse without revealing herself. To argue further would be to admit she had something to hide. She slipped the ring from her finger, her movements stiff. "Of course, darling. If it's important to you." She placed the ring in his palm. It felt unnervingly light. He closed his fingers around it. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he said, turning to leave. "Arthur," she called after him. Her voice was sharp. "Don't be long." He walked out of the room, the ring clutched in his hand, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. Samuel Finch was standing by the fireplace in the study, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the steady hands of a surgeon. He had been a rock for Arthur after Eleanor's death, handling the difficult task of sorting through her jewelry with immense compassion. "Sam," Arthur said, closing the study doors behind him. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Arthur. So this is the piece?" Sam asked, his professional curiosity piqued. Arthur opened his hand and placed the ring on the polished mahogany of his desk. It sat under the warm light of the desk lamp, blazing with fire. It was, to a layman's eye, utterly perfect. Sam picked it up. He didn't reach for his loupe immediately. Instead, he did something Arthur found strange. He closed his eyes and simply held it, feeling its weight and temperature in his palm. He turned it over and over with his thumb. "The setting is new," Sam murmured, his eyes still closed. "Excellent craftsmanship. Platinum. Very fine work." Then he opened his eyes and brought the ring closer. He squinted. A small frown touched his lips. He finally reached into his waistcoat pocket and pulled out his jeweler's loupe, a small, powerful magnifying glass. He fitted it to his eye and bent over the ring, his focus absolute. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a hammer blow against Arthur's nerves. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as he watched his friend examine the symbol of his future. Sam spent a long time looking. He turned the ring, studying the facets, the girdle, the culet. He held it up to the light, then angled it away. Finally, he put the loupe down on the desk with a soft click. He looked up at Arthur, and the expression on his face was one of deep, professional sorrow. He didn't need to say a word. Arthur already knew. "It's moissanite, isn't it?" Arthur asked, his voice a dead, emotionless thing. Sam nodded slowly. "A spectacular one. One of the best fakes I have ever seen in my 45 years in this business. The cut is designed to mimic an old mine cut, but it's too precise. Too perfect." Clara's observation about the edges was spot on. And the fire. A diamond has a balance of brilliance and fire. Moissanite has more fire. It's that excessive rainbow effect. It tries too hard. He picked up the stone again. The average person, Even a wealthy collector would be fooled. The certificates were likely for a real stone that was switched out. It's a classic, high-level con, Arthur. I am so sorry. The words were calm, clinical, but they landed like punches. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He sank into his desk chair, the strength gone from his legs. He looked at the ring, this glittering, beautiful lie. It had cost him millions. But the money was nothing. The real cost was his hope. The real cost was the shattering of the belief that he could find happiness again. What is it worth, Sam? He asked quietly. The setting is worth a few $1,000s. The jeweler replied gently. The stone itself? A few hundred. Maybe. A few $100s. He had traded his heart for a few $100s. The anger came then, hot and pure. Not just at Isabella, but at himself. At his weakness. His foolish, desperate loneliness. He had almost handed over his life, his legacy, and his name to a woman for a piece of beautifully cut silicon carbide. He stood up, his resolve hardening into steel. The play was over. It was time to bring down the curtain. Thank you, Sam, he said, his voice now firm, clear, and cold. Would you mind waiting here for a few minutes? I have one final piece of business to attend to. Arthur left Sam in the study and walked through the grand hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The house was alive with the final, frantic preparations for a party that would never happen. Staff members bustled past, their faces a mixture of stress and anticipation. They smiled respectfully at him. He nodded back, his face an impassive mask. Inside, he felt a cold, calm fury he hadn't experienced since a hostile takeover attempt on his company decades ago. It was a familiar, empowering feeling. The grief and vulnerability had been washed away, replaced by the steely resolve that had built his empire. He found Isabella in the grand ballroom, a glass of champagne already in her hand. She was talking to the leader of the string quartet, gesturing elegantly as she described the tempo she wanted for their entrance. She was playing the part of the lady of the manor to perfection. When she saw Arthur approaching, her face broke into a dazzling smile. There you are, darling. I was getting worried. Is everything all right with your jeweler? She asked, her voice light and musical. Everything is perfect, Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. He took the champagne flute from her hand and placed it on a nearby table. He then turned to the musician. Thank you, Mr. Dubois. Your services will not be required this evening. My assistant will see to it that you are paid in full for your time. You and your quartet may leave. The musician blinked, confused. Sir? But the guests. There will be no guests, Arthur said, his eyes locked on Isabella. Her smile had faltered, a flicker of uncertainty replacing its brilliance. Arthur, what on earth are you talking about? She demanded, forcing a laugh. Is this some kind of joke? A surprise? Oh, it's a surprise, all right, Arthur said. He took her by the elbow, his grip surprisingly strong. It was not a lover's touch. It was the grip of an arresting officer. Walk with me. He led her from the ballroom, past the stunned staff and bewildered musicians. Her confusion was rapidly turning to anger. Let go of me, Arthur. You're hurting my arm. What has gotten into you? He didn't answer until they were back in the cavernous foyer, standing on the very spot where, only hours before, a little girl's whisper had shattered his world. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air. He released her arm and turned to face her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. He held it out on the palm of his hand. Your ring, he said, his voice flat. She looked at it, then back at him, her brow furrowed in a caricature of loving concern. Darling, I don't understand. Did your friend not approve? Is it not grand enough? We can get another. A bigger one, if you like. It was the final, desperate gambit of a cornered liar. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. He approved of it a great deal, Arthur said, a humorless smile touching his lips. He called it one of the finest fakes he has ever seen. A truly spectacular piece of moissanite. Worth, perhaps, a few $100s. The color drained from Isabella's face. For the first time since he had known her, the mask slipped completely. He saw the real woman beneath. She was not sophisticated or charming. She was hard, cold, and terrified. That's absurd, she stammered, her voice losing its melodic quality, becoming thin and reedy. Your man is a fool. An old relic who wouldn't know a quality stone if it was right in front of him. This ring is certified. It has papers. The papers. I'm sure, are for a different stone entirely. Arthur continued, his voice relentless. A classic bait and switch. A con you have likely perfected over many years and many foolish, lonely old men. But you made a mistake here. You underestimated my household. Her eyes darted around the foyer, as if seeking an escape route. I don't know what you're talking about. You're being cruel. You're breaking my heart. The tears welling in her eyes were a masterful touch. A month ago, they would have shattered him. Now he saw them for what they were, saline and strategy. Stop, he said, the single word cutting through the air like a blade. The performance is over. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think my entire life was built on blissful ignorance? He took a step closer, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. Let me tell you what I think. I think you are not Isabella Rossi. That name probably doesn't even exist. I think you were fed information about me. About my collections, my habits, my loneliness. You studied me like a subject. You learned my grief, and you weaponized it. You found the empty spaces in my life, and you filled them with a perfectly crafted illusion. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The actress was off script. She had no lines for this scene. The investments, he went on, ticking off her betrayals like items on a ledger. The painting, the money wired to overseas accounts. It was a systematic bleeding, wasn't it? A carefully managed liquidation of my assets. And this piece of glass, he said, flicking the ring with his finger, was to be the grand finale. The key that would give you access to the rest of it. Marriage. A legal claim. The Pendleton name. He looked at her, at the beautiful face that was now pale with panic, and he felt a profound and chilling emptiness. He had not been in love with her. He had been in love with a ghost she had created. Who told you about Eleanor? He asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but it was more menacing than any shout. Who told you she loved maritime art? Who told you she spoke German? At the mention of the language, a flicker of genuine confusion crossed her face. German? What does German have to do with anything? And in that moment, he understood. She had no idea. She had no idea that her downfall had come not from a high-tech security system or a private investigator, but from the quiet, observant eyes of a 10-year-old girl. The irony was almost too much to bear. This master manipulator, this weaver of intricate lies, had been undone by a child's simple, honest truth. It was a detail so far outside her calculated world that she couldn't even comprehend it. Get out, Arthur said. The words were quiet, but they held the absolute authority of a man who owned the very ground on which she stood. You will leave this house now. You will take nothing with you but the clothes you are wearing. One of my security staff will escort you to the gate. If you ever try to contact me or come near my property again, I will not hesitate to use the full force of the law against you. I have already had my lawyers begin the process of freezing the accounts and recovering the assets you stole from me. You are finished. She stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. The fear was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly rage of a thief who had been caught. You'll regret this, she hissed, her voice venomous. You will be a lonely old man in this mausoleum, rattling around with your ghosts. I made you happy. I brought this house back to life. This house was never dead, Arthur countered, his voice like ice. It was just quiet. And you are not life. You are just noise. Loud, expensive, and empty. He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the grand foyer. He didn't look back as he heard her begin to scream, a torrent of curses and threats. He didn't look back as he heard the firm, quiet footsteps of his head of security approaching. He just kept walking, toward his study, toward the silence, which for the first time in 5 years, felt like peace. He returned to the study to find Sam Finch packing his equipment. The jeweler looked up, his expression full of concern. Is it done? Sam asked. It's done, Arthur confirmed, running a hand over his weary face. He felt as though he had just survived a plane crash. He was exhausted, bruised, but alive. Thank you, Sam, for everything, for your discretion, and for your friendship. Always, Arthur, Sam said, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. What will you do now? About the party? Arthur looked around the room, at the books that held centuries of wisdom, at the portrait of his wife, her painted eyes seeming to hold a hint of approval. The grand, elaborate party felt like a relic from another man's life. I'll have the staff cancel everything, he said. They'll be paid for a full evening's work, of course. Send the flowers to the local hospitals. Send the food to the city's homeless shelters. Let some good come out of this mess. After Sam had departed, Arthur stood alone in the quiet study. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The house was settling around him. The frantic energy of the party preparations was dissipating, replaced by the calm efficiency of cancellation. He could hear the faint, respectful murmurs of the staff as they went about their new tasks. He should have felt devastated. He had been betrayed in the most intimate way possible. He had been made a fool of. And yet, what he felt most strongly was not heartbreak, but a strange, unsettling sense of gratitude. The crisis had passed. The fever had broken. He had been pulled back from a precipice he hadn't even known he was standing on. He knew he could not have done it alone. He picked up the intercom and buzzed the kitchen. Helen, would you please ask Clara if she would be willing to join me in the library? And perhaps you could bring us some tea. A few minutes later, he was in the two-story library, the scent of old books a familiar comfort. He heard a soft knock and the door opened. Helen entered carrying a silver tray with a teapot, 2 cups, and a plate of small cookies. Behind her was Clara, who looked at him with a shy, uncertain expression. She was clearly worried she was the cause of all the commotion, the sudden departure of the caterers and musicians. Thank you, Helen, Arthur said with a warm smile. Please, join us. Helen hesitated, looking uncomfortable. In all her years of service, she had never been invited to sit with him. Please, Arthur insisted, gesturing to one of the comfortable leather armchairs. Today, you are my guest. Helen slowly sat, perching on the edge of the chair, while Clara took her usual spot in the oversized armchair opposite Arthur, her small feet dangling far above the floor. Arthur poured the tea, his hands steady. He passed a cup to Helen, and then to Clara, who took it carefully with both hands. He let the silence sit for a moment, a comfortable, shared quiet. Then he looked directly at Clara, his eyes full of a sincerity she had never seen from him before. I owe you an apology, Clara, he began, his voice soft. And a thank you. I should have listened to you this morning. I should have trusted what you saw. You were right. The ring was not real. Clara looked down into her teacup, a faint blush on her cheeks. My Opa always said that most people don't want to see the truth. They want to see what they hope is true. Arthur felt the child's words pierce him. That was it, exactly. He had been so desperate for the illusion to be real that he had ignored all the evidence to the contrary. Your Opa was a very wise man, Arthur said. Your mother told me about him. About his work during the war. He was a hero. Helen looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He was just a good man, sir. He believed in protecting beautiful things. He believed in the truth. He did more than that, Arthur said. He passed on his gift. To Clara. He turned his full attention back to the little girl. You have a remarkable ability, Clara. A way of seeing the world that is very, very rare. Your grandfather taught you to see the difference between what is real and what is fake. And today, you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. You saved this family's legacy. You saved me from a great deal of pain. He paused, letting his words sink in. He wanted her to understand the magnitude of what she had done. She hadn't just pointed out a fake ring. She had rescued a man from the ruins of his own loneliness. I can never repay you for that, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. But I would like to try. He looked from Clara to Helen, his gaze encompassing them both. I would like to make a proposal. I want to ensure Clara has every opportunity to develop her gift. The best schools, the best tutors, whatever she needs to pursue her interests, whether they be in art or history or gemology. I want to establish a trust for her education, one that will see her through university and beyond. Helen stared at him, speechless. Tears were now streaming freely down her face. She put a hand to her mouth, unable to comprehend the scale of his offer. And Helen, Arthur said, turning to her, I would like you to consider a new role in this household. Not as my maid, but as the estate manager. To run this house as you see fit, with a salary that reflects that responsibility. I need people I can trust. And today, I have learned that there is no one I can trust more than the two of you. Helen was overcome, her hand fluttering to her heart as she tried to compose herself. The offer was beyond anything she could have ever dreamed of. It wasn't just a job. It was a gesture of profound respect and trust that erased the invisible lines of servitude that had defined her life within these walls. But Arthur's gaze had already shifted, settling again on the small, still figure in the armchair. He leaned forward, creating a small, intimate space between just the two of them in the vast library. "Clara," he said, his voice gentle, conspiratorial. "Your mother and I will handle the business of running the house. But I have a more important job for you, if you'll accept it." Clara looked up, her blue eyes wide and questioning, the teacup held tightly in her small hands. "I need a partner," Arthur continued, a small, genuine smile forming on his face. "This old house is filled with beautiful things. Paintings, sculptures, books, and jewelry. For 5 years, I haven't truly looked at any of it. I've been walking past it all blind. I need someone to help me see it again, to tell me its story, to help me find the flaws, because as you taught me today, the flaws are the most important part." He gestured to the towering shelves of books that surrounded them. "This library is full of stories. But your grandfather gave you a special kind of literacy. You don't just read words, you read objects. You read the truth in things. I want you to help me sort the real from the fake, not just in gemstones, but in everything. I want you to be my official curator of truth." He said the title with a playful solemnity that made Clara's lips twitch into a small, shy smile. For the first time all day, the heavy seriousness in her eyes lifted, replaced by a spark of childish excitement. A curator. It sounded important. It sounded like something her Opa would have been proud of. "It will involve a lot of reading," Arthur warned, his smile widening. "And trips to museums. And perhaps arguing with stuffy old art historians. It's a very demanding position. But I think you're the only person qualified for the job." Clara looked from Arthur's earnest face to her mother's tearful, beaming one. Her entire world had been turned on its axis in the course of a single day. This morning, she was an invisible child, hiding in corners with her books. Now, this powerful, wealthy man was not just offering her a future. He was asking for her help. He was valuing her for the one thing that had always made her feel different, for the strange and wonderful legacy her grandfather had left her. She finally found her voice, a small but steady whisper that held the weight of a promise. "I would like that, Mr. Pendleton." "Please," he said, his voice soft. "Call me Arthur." He stood up and walked to a glass display case in the corner of the library. From it, he took a small, leather-bound book and an old-fashioned magnifying glass with a handle of worn silver. He brought them back and knelt in front of Clara's chair, placing them in her lap. "This was my father's," he said, tapping the magnifying glass. "And this is a catalog of my family's oldest collection. It's full of photographs. Some are real, some are very clever copies my grandfather used to train his own eye. It's where we'll start." Clara picked up the heavy magnifying glass. It felt cool and solid in her hand. It felt like a tool, a key. She looked through it at the book, the printed words jumping into sharp, clear focus. Then she looked up at Arthur, and for the first time, she gave him a full, radiant smile. It was a smile that drank the light, a smile without a single flaw, a smile that was, in every conceivable way, absolutely real. And in the quiet, peaceful library, surrounded by stories of the past, their new story had just begun. 6 months later, the Pendleton estate was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was not the heavy, grief-stricken silence of before, but a peaceful, contemplative one. The grand rooms, once monuments to a lonely past, were now filled with the soft sounds of life. The rustle of pages turning in the library, the murmur of a Latin lesson in the morning room, and, occasionally, the bright, clear sound of a child's laughter. The name Isabella Rossi, after a quiet investigation, was discovered to be one of many aliases used by a professional con artist. Faced with Arthur's team of relentless lawyers, she had quietly surrendered a significant portion of the stolen funds in exchange for avoiding a public prosecution that would have exposed her entire network. For Arthur, it was enough. The money was never the point. His days were now structured around a new, joyful purpose. He and Clara, his official curator of truth, had embarked on a grand project to recatalog every piece of art and jewelry in the Pendleton collection. Their afternoons were spent in the library, poring over auction records and historical texts. Arthur would watch, mesmerized, as Clara would hold a centuries-old necklace up to the light, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This one is sad, Arthur," she might say, pointing with a small finger. "See how the clasp was repaired? The soldering is newer. Someone loved it so much they couldn't bear to lose it, even when it broke." She taught him to read the stories he had only owned, to see the history he had only collected. Helen, now the firm but fair manager of the entire estate, moved with a newfound confidence. She managed budgets and staff with the same quiet efficiency she had once polished silver, ensuring the grand house ran not just smoothly, but happily. The dynamic had shifted entirely. They were no longer just employer and employees, but a peculiar and wonderful kind of family, forged in the crucible of a near disaster. On a warm spring afternoon, Arthur was not in a boardroom or at a gala. He was in the sun-drenched gallery on the second floor, watching as Clara stood before a newly acquired painting, a 17th-century landscape. "Well," Arthur asked, a playful twinkle in his eye. "What's the verdict, curator?" Clara tilted her head, her blonde hair catching the light. She studied the painting for a long moment, her gaze sharp and discerning. "The light on the water is real," she said finally. "It feels cold, like a real morning. But the signature—" She leaned closer, her nose almost touching the canvas. "The signature is shouting." Arthur smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. He had been saved by this little girl, not just from a scam, but from himself. She had reminded him that the most valuable things in life are not the ones that glitter and shout for attention. They are the ones that are quiet, honest, and true. The real wealth, he now understood, was not in his bank accounts or on his walls. It was here, in the sunshine of his home, in the sharp eyes of a brilliant child, in the quiet wisdom of knowing, finally, what was real. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.